They're coming to get you, Barbara.
What do people call you, Pete?
Mr. Joshua.
What's your name?
Schreck.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
Look, there comes one of them now.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Schreck Talk. Tonight we're going to be talking about a book series. Actually,
that was a good intro, by the way.
Yeah, it just kind of came to me, you know, Stampede. And so we're talking about a book series. It's actually one of my favorite book series. It is the Robot series. But I'm gonna let Mr. Schreck over here introduce the author.
The author is going to be... by the way, that's a mighty fine... You're looking mighty cool in that Amy Pond, the girl who waited shirt there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well,
but my favorite author, Isaac Asimov, his most popular series is probably the Foundation series, which I accidentally discovered one day at Goodwill up in Colorado when I was there. And I stumbled across these two old books. The back of the book said it's one of the most popular series in science fiction. So I picked it up, started reading it, and then from then on I was hooked. I've got 50 probably Isaac Asimov books, doubles of a lot of books with different covers. I've got hardbacks, everything like that. He's got one all-encompassing Foundation series, but then he's got three different series that are in that: the regular Foundation series, the Galactic Empire series, and the Robot series, which I know is Mr. Joshua's favorite. And that's why I'm surprised this is my author, and I really enjoy his work, and I'm surprised that you actually picked this topic for him. But the Robot stories kind of started out he started writing them in 1939. It was a real passion of his. He came up with the 3 laws of robotics. He actually came up with the word robotics. It was never used before him, and he just thought that was the natural conclusion of it. Never knew he was making up a word, but he did. So the Robot series, when he was alive, he died in 1991, I believe. From a blood transfusion, he got AIDS. But from his point of view, his Robot stories were his favorite, even though the Foundation series was more popular and actually beat Lord of the Rings in 1968, I believe, for the Nebula Award or Hugo Award for the greatest book series of all time. The Foundation series actually beat out Tolkien. The Robot series is more near and dear to his heart. And if you look up on Wiki, one thing you see right from the beginning is they name the first book as I, Robot in his Robot series.
Yeah, no, I can't agree with that being the first book in the series. That's a collection of his short stories, some of which, I don't believe all of them, but some of which contained a character named Susan Calvert, I think her name was, Dr. Susan Calvert?
Calvin,
excuse me. And yeah, I don't really think that one really counts because for me, it's just those were stories that were written, never meant to be put together. They weren't written with the intention of becoming a novel. They were just a collection of short stories that were, while good short stories and fitting into the overall universe, I don't really factor them in because they're not part of a consistent timeline and a consistent storyline. So I consider the first one, what we'll be really talking about today, is the 4 books relating to Elijah Bailey, the Earthman, and his robot partner,
human form robot, which is sort of similar like to Data, but he looks completely human, maybe like the Blade Runner robots you could think of.
Yeah, somebody who you might be if you didn't know, but would consider possibly be passable as human. R. Daniel Olivaw, I believe. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but that's how it's spelled. So, and I think I really liked these books when I first read them. Caves of Steel being the first one, which was written in 1954, 60 years ago.
Well, no, actually released in 1953.
In serial form originally.
Yes.
Yeah, all of these, well, at least the first two were...
The first two came out in Astounding Science Fiction, I think, magazine
some serial
in
form.
the 50s.
And they have a fast pace. You can kind of tell maybe that they were written in still form because they just go and they move at this like kind of lightning speed. I mean, I think one of the stories takes place over like a day and a half, 2 days or something like that. And I really fell in love with them. I flew through the first book, Caves of Steel, in one day. But like before I go in, let's start with Caves of Steel since that's the first book.
All the books in this series are not only about robots, but they're also mystery novels. Isaac took a challenge from his editor that he said you could never write a science fiction mystery because you could just come up with some kind of crazy concoction, some kind of crazy science fiction-y thing, some new gadget or something like that to fool the reader. And Isaac decided that wasn't right, and he went about writing a mystery novel that followed all the rules of regular mystery novels from Edgar Allan Poe and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but had a science fiction setting. So these are all robot mysteries. And the first one being The Caves of Steel from 1953. It's kind of, he creates this whole world in Earth in the future where everything is covered. All the cities are big, huge metropolises covered in domes. Nobody goes outside. This kind of plays into his agoraphobic nature, that he was naturally that way. But the whole thing takes place on Earth in a future where humans outnumber the robots, but robots are kind of taking over the jobs and stuff like that of the people.
Yeah, well, before you go into it too much, you also got to think about why these robots are becoming such a part of our society. There's actually two different cultures. You have the Earth culture, as you explained, in these giant dome cities, and then you have another culture called the Spacers, which were human beings who had centuries ago left the planet and gone and populated 50 other worlds outside of Earth, and they kind of advanced technologically and advanced in a lot of ways over human beings, while the humans stayed, in cities, and now they kind of control and restrict where they go, and they're not allowed to, they're much more advanced. Basically, they're the dominant force of human beings. They're almost like another species, to be quite honest.
Yeah, Earth is just like a backwater alley kind of planet that's like populated with a bunch of normal people like us, whereas the Spacers have advanced. Their society is far more more advanced than, I guess, to use the word advanced again, far more advanced than our society is.
They're disease-free, which increases their lifespan. They're living, hundreds of years, 300-400 years, and but at the same time, they're also very prone to get into infection. They can easily pick up things from people because they haven't been exposed. Similar how to when we came to America, the Native Americans hadn't been exposed to smallpox and things like that, so they're much more susceptible to getting it. And this is the problem the Spacers had, so they had to be really cautious when interacting with human beings because they could easily get sick from them, and which could cause them to die, just because they'd never been exposed to those things. So it's almost like another species, I would say, and they really are different. Their worlds are very sparsely populated compared to Earth, and they each have a unique society. We don't get to know all over the course of the books. We only get to know a few of them. But the main one that's real dominant, that you really get to know anything about in the majority of the books, would be Aurora, the world of Dawn, which was the first world populated by Earth. But back to this story, it's mainly about so these Spacers have this place called Spacetown, where they are kind of keeping a watch on us. The people riot. They don't like it that it's there. They feel like human beings feel like they're intruding on us.
I think of it kind of like an embassy. The Spacer Embassy is Spacetown, and this is where all the Spacers go. They can keep themselves separate from the dirty, infectious humans around, and because they are the power, there's actually references to some stuff that happened in the past that you don't really know about, where there was like a siege over Earth and stuff like that. So they have a rough history, and this is the area where they kind of keep their people at, to kind of keep, like you said, keep an eye on the Earthmen and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there ends up being a murder committed inside Spacetown. So this is how you get this kind of awkward partnership of Elijah Bailey, who's just a plainclothesman, I believe is the term
they call him, a plainclothesman.
I think he's a C5 or what?
I don't remember what the designation
his class is. But he's a police officer, a regular beat cop, basically, kind of like a detective. And they stick him with this robot, human form robot, Daniel, and they from this point,
Well, and you got to mention that Daniel, the robot, is from the Spacers. So you've got the plainclothesmen from the Earth people investigating this, and then you've got Daniel, the robot, from the Spacers investigating this. So they're kind of working together. They're partners together on this mystery about the murder.
Yeah, and Elijah Bailey is at first pretty reluctant to be working with our Daniel. As he considers robots, he's like most humans. He considers robots to be not a very good thing at all.
Yeah, there's actually an element of like racism and stuff like that into it from the very beginning when he's talking about our Sammy in the police station, because there are robots on Earth, but they're not as important, or people don't care about them,
and they're not developed either,
and as much as the Spacers.
Yeah, they're spoken down to. They're treated very inferior.
They like what robot means, slave.
Yeah, and so you get. Daniel, and by the end of the story, you develop a nice friendship and an understanding between the two main characters, and definitely, I would say, by the end of the first story, they're friends.
Yeah, they're definitely friends. The mystery in this one wasn't that great. The story, I didn't think it was, but this whole world, this world that he throws you into, it's really believable, and that's one of the things that I love about the Isaac Asimov stories, is he can throw you into these worlds and make them completely believable. And it's very, like you said, very fast-paced, energetic. The story picks up right from the beginning and just keeps going, and you can read it pretty quickly in a day or so.
Yeah, and while the payoff may not have been as great as it could have been, I didn't mind. Again, it's not about the destination; it's about the journey. And so my final thoughts on the book are that it's a good setup. It's probably one of my least favorite. It's probably my least favorite of the four. If I had to just, I've never really ranked them that much, but it's probably my least favorite. Just because the mystery was resolved rather. It was okay. But it's definitely a good book, a good read. It kept me into it. I read the next book within a couple of days, I think, because I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, I would definitely put that one last on the list as well.
So moving on to the next one, which is arguably my favorite one. I don't know. It's so hard. Would be Naked Sun, which came out in 1957 in novel form. Again, I think it was
serialized in 55.
55. Okay. And this one is very similar in a lot of ways and very different in a lot of ways. It's the idea was, in the first story, you had a story of a robot and the human detectives together trying to solve this mystery on a planet with mostly humans and very few robots.
A very high degree of humans to robot ratio. And then on this other planet, which is actually the last settled by the Spacers, is the 50th Spacer world.
Yeah, it's Solaria, which has I believe the exact number is 20,000 population for the entire planet, was exactly 20,000 people, and there's a 10,000 to 1 robot to human ratio. So every human has 10,000 robots. For every human on the planet, there's 10,000 robots. It is the highest population ratio compared to like a world like Aurora, which would have a 50 to 1 ratio, humans to robots.
Yeah, and this is where you really
robot to human.
Yeah, this is where you really get into the agoraphobic nature. It takes place a year after the Caves of Steel. There's another mystery on the planet of Solaria, and they have, because of what happened the first time, they have Elijah Bailey. They've got a great respect for him and everything like that. They bring him to investigate this murder, and he goes to this planet that, like you said, it's very sparsely populated. There's lots of open area. And this is where you see the kind of way people have become, the agoraphobic nature. And he's got to deal with this while trying to solve this murder.
Yeah, and I think some fun facts I really like. Maybe the reason I like the book so much is because I like Solaria so much. Basically, the population of the planet never comes in contact with other members of their population. They only come in contact with them when they have to procreate, and it's reluctantly. They do use a thing called viewing, where they look at, they see each other, and basically they're in the same room with them through technology. It looks like they're in the same room, even though they're not. They're in their own individual states, thousands of miles apart. And they really never come in contact with any other human beings except for that reason. And even then, it's kind of disgusting to them.
Yeah, they're very much. Whereas the people on Earth are crowded together like crazy, the people on Solaria are very much separate from each other, and they don't like human contact or anything like that. They, like you said, they look at each other on the videos and that kind of stuff. They don't really have any human interaction. Everybody owns these huge estates with all kinds of robot servants for them and everything like that. So it's a very, very different world that you see on Solaria that you don't get on Earth.
Yeah, and we also get introduced to a character that would become very important in the series later, Gladia, which is a Solarian woman. She'll become very important in the series. We can just it's not that big of it. She's the wife of the murdered Solarian that he's investigating.
Yeah, and like you said, that whole relationship and everything, they never really spent any time with each other. They were very, very separated. It wasn't a typical marriage like we think about.
Yeah, and so she comes into play in this book, though, and so, I have to mention her. But again, very fast pace. The story moves, and he's investigating the mystery again, using at his wit's end at all the time, just like he is in the first book. I think we see a continuation of the friendship between the two, which by the end of this, they're even much closer friends than they were. At the beginning of the book, he's excited to see him again. In fact, I would argue that, he even is having issues with his friendship. How close he feels to him, and he has to remind himself sometimes of that he's a robot, and then he wonders why it's such a problem at other times. So I think this book, again, it's the mystery keeps me. This one I like the mystery a lot more. I like how it resolves itself. I feel like this one it could have been the first book, and I would still enjoyed it as much. But it's even better having made it through the first book, being satisfied to get this one as a very good sequel.
Yes, and then we move on to the third book, which actually didn't come out for almost 30 years later. He had stopped writing.
Yeah, why don't you explain why it took so long for us to get another one?
Yeah, he got kind of... he had written a manuscript for the third one. It was called The Bounds of Infinity. He had wrote it for a while, and it just didn't work out. He was trying to do put more of a romance into it, and it just wasn't working the way he wanted to. So he shelved it, and he eventually moved on to writing more nonfiction. Isaac Asimov is a very prolific writer. He has written, I think, 8 of the 9 points or something in the Dewey Decimal System. He has books in each one of those. So he's written all kinds of things, from the science fiction stuff to the nonfiction with like mathematics, literature, religion. He's written across the board. So that's where he spent most of his time. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, his book publisher came to him and gave him a huge advance to go back to his fiction Foundation series. And when he went back to the Foundation fiction series, he invariably wanted to go back to the robot series. And because that was kind of the series that he loved the most, and he decided to tie the two series in together. And so he came out with the third book, which was released in 1983. It was nominated for a Hugo Award and a Locus Award, and that was The Robots of Dawn.
Yeah, Robots of Dawn, I think, there's a definite change in his writing style when he came back into fiction. I think that's evident by just the difference in his Foundation novels, compared to the originals compared to later. And the robot novels, same thing. This novel feels very different, just in the way he's written. He's, how many years has it passed? 30 years.
Yeah, almost 30 years.
And so it was time, he decided he had a different flavor, and he introduced who would become an extremely important character in this book, Giscard.
Yeah, if you listen to our few episodes ago, we had our top 5 robots. I think it was actually our first episode, and that our Giscard was in both of our lists.
Mm-hmm.
A big thing, like you were saying, a big change that happened in the writing style and everything like that is he became more verbose, I guess you could say, and he got into a lot more explaining details. It wasn't just fast-paced action. He was telling a much more involved story, a little bit more detailed than usual. There was still a high level of action and stuff like that, but
he spent more time on character development,
yes.
I would think. And you got the characters came around a little more three-dimensional. Not to say that they were flat or anything in the original ones, but I just felt we got more depth into understanding who they were. We really got to know lives, and even Danielle and Gladia.
And we brought Gladia back for this one, and then we introduced Giscard. And this takes place on the first spacer world, Aurora.
Aurora, yeah.
Which is a more even ratio of humans, or spacers, I guess you could say, to robots. It's a more even, and they're much more It's where R. Daniel was created.
Yeah, in fact, what we're studying, what the mystery in this one is we are studying who's the committed roboticide on Jander, which is the only other human form robot that was created in the image of the guy from, I believe it was the first book, who died. It looks exactly like him.
Yeah, it looks like R. Daniel. They look identical, I think.
Sarton or whatever his name was, the person who was murdered in the first book.
Yeah.
So it's about who could have committed this, and it's again a mystery. He's going around asking questions, trying to resolve it with the help of Danielle. But it feels very different from the first two books. The pacing is a lot slower, I would think, but it is still a fast-paced story. But we get more time to delve into his thoughts.
Yeah, and this one isn't really just like a single mystery like the first two are. This one has very huge galactic, galactic.
Repercussions.
Repercussions.
There's much more going on than just the simple roboticide that we're investigating.
Yeah, and it leads into what eventually becomes the Foundation series. It starts those initial, little seedlings about what eventually becomes the Foundation universe.
The Galactic Empire,
yes,
which was another, it all tied into the series as well. I really liked this book a lot. Again, I thought the Gladia character would become more important. She would become the main character in the next book, and I think they really developed her into like a third lead character. No longer was it just Elijah and Danielle. It was now Gladia was just important, even though she was kind of a smaller role in this book. They amped up her importance, and she was so important in the last book to what happened. She was so important in this book to what happened. She'd be very important in the next book too. So what I liked about this book is, even though it's a little transitory, it has a good ending. It has a nice solid ending. In fact, this would be the last book we see Elijah in, so it definitely ends his story pretty much. And I think it's one of it's hard to name my favorites. I like them all so much.
Yeah, I would probably put this one second on my list, behind the last book. So they go in reverse order for me. The last book, then this one, then The Naked Sun, and then Caves of Steel.
I understand why you would like the last book. I mean, for me, I would have, before we move on, my final thought on this book would probably be, I'd probably put it second. Probably put it right behind Naked Sun. If I had to say it, just because I really like Giscard in this book a lot, and it's nice to see all the three characters that I like together.
Yeah. So then we move on to the last book. Like I said, it's my favorite, and this is the one that really ties the Robot series into the Foundation novels, and that would be Robots and Empire. So like I said, there was 3 series that are all encompassing in the larger Foundation universe. There's the Robot series, the Galactic Empire series, and then the Foundation series. And you can see, just by the title of this one, Robots and Empire, you can see how this one leads into what becomes the Galactic Empire.
Yeah, and this book was definitely very different. It takes place a little over 200 years, I think, in the future, about 200 years after the last book. So obviously Elijah's dead.
There is a scene in there where they're reminiscing a flashback scene into that, but other than that,
Gladia and Danielle, I would say, are our main characters in this book.
And Giscard.
And Giscard, yes, Gladia, Danielle, and Giscard.
Yeah,
are the main characters.
All the stuff that happened in the third book has major repercussions on what this entire story is about. It's dealing with the repercussions of what happened in the Robots of Dawn.
Yeah, you had 2 characters that were pretty important in Robots of Dawn that are pretty important in this book as well. These characters, and I think this one, it feels different. It obviously feels different because there's, a lot different. Earth is advanced. We now have settlers. Our other lead character that we're introduced to this is called DG Bailey, which stands for Daniel Giscard. He's a descendant of Elijah, and apparently every descendant of Elijah who has one of those names given to them, Daniel or Giscard, because of how important they were to him, just to show the friendship that he had for those robots.
And this one's a very, very going back to the first 2 books, it's a lot faster paced than the Robots of Dawn was. The Robots of Dawn was kind of a slower character building mystery. This one is that, but it's a lot more action paced, or a lot more action centered, a lot more faster paced than you get in the Robots of Dawn. And it's similar to The Naked Sun and Caves of Steel, where it's very, very energetic and stuff like that. It's a little bit more verbose. Similar, it's kind of a cross between the first 2 and Robots of Dawn.
Yeah, I would say, that's a pretty good assessment. I think the mystery in this one, there isn't much of a mystery in this one, but they're on a mission, and they have this mission keeps them on a fast pace. They realize the stakes of it, how important what they have to do is, and so we get our characters really pushing forward, like knowing that the clock is ticking and events lead down through one another into continue on this spiral till we reach the end point of the story, which has a pretty great conclusion. I definitely think of the conclusions to the robot books, it's the most impactful. It really says a lot, and it just, when it ends, that's the end of that really is the end of the robot novels. There doesn't need to be any more robot novels after that.
Yeah, and he never had any plans. Like, he had more Foundation novels before he died, all planned out and everything like that, but he didn't have any more robot novels. He kind of just went right into the Foundation story and kept going on that. You can kind of separate the series into two different series, actually. You get The Naked Sun and Caves of Steel in the 1950s robot mystery stories, and then you get the other two, which really tie everything into the greater Foundation universe. And those two novels are written very similarly, whereas the first two novels are written very similar as well.
Yeah, because they were written, so close together and so far apart. If I recall, he wrote when he came back, he wrote Foundation's Edge first, and then he wrote both of the robot novels back to back.
I think so, and those were released in 83 and 85.
Yeah.
And I think Foundation's Edge was released in 82, maybe?
Yeah, and then in 87
86, I think, was actually Foundation and Earth.
86 was Foundation. So he definitely popped those two out back to back, which I think is pretty apparent when you read them. The writing style is very similar. I've reread every one of these books. I think they're great reads. I think I honestly can't say enough about. You just heard us talk about how much we like them. I can't say anything more about how fun they are, how much they interest you, and it made me want to read when I was done with this, I read the Foundation books because I enjoyed especially the last two books, how it all tied in.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a quick, easy read, I would definitely check these books out. They're easy to read, and they kind of really draw you in. Like I said, I've read the Caves of Steel in a day. I haven't reread them like Mr. Joshua has. He's very prolific at rereading the same books. I'm actually saving those books there was a bunch of different authors that came in and wrote Isaac Asimov universe stories, and I've been collecting those and everything like that. There's a second Foundation trilogy. There's a bunch of other robots. There's Robots and Aliens, Robots in Time, Robot City. There's all kinds of different ones, and I'm kind of stacking those up, buying all those old books, and then I'm going to read all of the books in chronological order, all of Asimov's, all of the other authors, so I haven't read them again. But that is something that I want to mention, that he had such an impact on a lot of writers that he's considered one of the grand masters of science fiction, that people have taken up his mantle and continued on his stories after he's been dead. He's been dead for since 1991, 1992, and there's still people writing books. There was one just released this year, I believe, a robot novel that was just released this year. So, those stories, they're easy to pick up, easy to read. You can really get into them. Robots in Empire is hard to find. You'll have to probably find it in an old bookstore or something like that. But the first three have been re-released. You can find them. You can probably find Robots in Empire on the Kindle version if you want. But go check them out. The first two are really easy to read. And if you want to continue on with the series, go pick up Robots at Dawn, a little bit longer, more involved, and Robots in Empire as well. Any other final thoughts on our robot series?
No, not really. Like I said, I love them. They're great books. I wish I could reread them for the first time again, like I do with many books I love. That's why I reread them so much, because I want to have that first experience of how amazing it was back again. And it's never the same, but it's still just as good.
Alrighty, so that's our thoughts on the robot series. Now we've got Mr. Joshua's Tea Time coming up now.
Tea time! Tea time!
And I finally get to introduce my tea, which I've been sipping on here for a little while, and I'm pretty excited for that. It's from the St. James Tea Room again here in town, in Albuquerque, in the Berkey. And it's
the 505.
The 505, I like that. And it's called Earl a la Creme. It's an Earl Grey, obviously, with a hint of vanilla in there, and I think there's some corn flour and some other things in there. It's got a real nice, smooth taste. It's really good. Just black. I always drink it straight, but it's good with milk and sugar. But tonight I'm going to be talking about a topic, what I think is arguably one of my favorite trilogies, one of the best trilogies of all time, and it's probably not something you're going to expect to hear, but it's called the Before Trilogy. They're all directed by and written by Richard Linklater, and it's basically 3 romance films.
Richard Linklater, if you don't know who he is, the only movie I can actually think of offhand, I know he just came out with a new movie, Boyhood, that was really popular, but the one you may have heard of, Dazed and Confused, he did that movie as well. And I think Almost Famous, he did that one too.
No, that's Cameron Crowe.
Oh, Cameron Crowe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Richard Linklater, he did also School of Rock. He directed it, didn't write it. He also directed the Bad News Bears remake, which wasn't so great. He's done a lot of movies. But the Before series is definitely my favorite, and a lot of people's favorite. Is a straightforward romance, human story. I don't really want to, it is a romance, but I don't want to sit there and classify it strictly as that, because it's a lot more real than that. It's a couple of people connecting and having conversation. Literally, the 3 movies are just people having conversations about life and how they feel about things, and that's pretty much the entirety of what you watch when you're watching the films. Which one have you seen? All 3?
No, I haven't seen any of them.
You haven't actually seen any of them?
No, I haven't watched any of them. I'm not a big romance fan, so these kind of movies don't really get me. I know how much you like them. We've got in our guest room, we've got 2 of the 3 posters, the actual official movie posters up in the room, so I know how much you like them. It just doesn't interest me. It's not something that I'm into. It is starring Ethan Hawke, and who's the female lead?
Julie Delpy, who the only she was in 2 Days in Paris and 2 Days in New York recently, which were pretty popular. Her most mainstream movie she probably ever did was an American Werewolf in Paris back in the mid-'90s, which wasn't that great. But I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the films real quick. So if you haven't seen them, I'm obviously going to have to spoil them a little bit, so you may not, if you're really concerned about that, like I know a few people are, you may want to skip past this section.
Go check out the movies and then come back and listen to this section.
There you go. That's the best request. But the first film starts, it takes place in 1995. It was released in 95, or it takes place in 94 and was released in 95. Whatever. They're all 9 years apart, and it's a guy and a girl on a train. They meet. They both just start having a conversation. Decide he has to get off the train because he's waiting to get a flight out of town to go back to the States. And he asks her to basically get off the train and walk around, spend the night hanging out with him. And she agrees, oddly, weirdly enough. You wouldn't see that too often anymore.
Especially, it doesn't take place in Europe?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you watch a movie like Hostel, yeah, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and but they get off and they just walk around and they basically start talking a little bit about life and love and everything under the sun. They're walking around exploring the city, and it's just great conversation, great dialogue. That's definitely, all these movies are very dialogue heavily. That's pretty much the only thing that happens. You get a little bit of some nice cinematography in them, but it's mostly the dialogue and the characters that drives these movies.
Yeah, and I am a big dialogue fan. I love Kevin Smith's dialogue. I love Quentin Tarantino's dialogue. I just watched one of the last few episodes of Sons of Anarchy, and the dialogue in that episode is great. So I'm a big dialogue fan. I'm just not a big romance fan.
Well, and I think the romance is so subtle in this film because it's so natural. It's the way when you meet someone and you enjoy talking to them, the romance is developing. It's not really like it's meant to be cheesy. It's not over the top. It's real. It's how people really interact with each other, and that's what I think makes it such a good romance movie.
Does the movie take place in real time?
No, not the first one. The second one actually would. I'll get to that in a second. But basically, they meet. They have this wonderful night together, and at the end of the film, they separate, and they say, "We're going to meet each other back here in 6 months." And that's the end of the film. They don't give each other their numbers. They say, "We'll meet back here in 6 months," and that's the end of it. And you have to decide whether for yourself, if you thought they met there or not, and make up your own kind of ending to their story, which was a great, nice treat. And then you would get, in 2004, you would get the sequel, Before Sunset, which takes place 9 years later, and it starts off, and this is the one that takes place in real time, which is it's probably my top 10 movies of all time. I would definitely, this was the first one I saw, and they walk around. Basically, he wrote a book about their night together. You find out through, she finds out that he wrote this book, and they walk around talking. You find out that they didn't meet. One of them was unable to make it. But they talk about their lives, where they've gone, what's happened to them. One of them is married and, has a kid. And they discuss where their lives are. And you can tell there's still that same connection between them. And by the time the story is done, you pretty much know this ending. They tried to leave it ambiguous as well, but you pretty much know what's going to happen. You know they're going to get together. But this one, I think it has some of the greatest. It shows the way people have changed. You know, the way the characters talked in the first movie, and the way their views were, and how hopeful and bright they were. They're now in their early 30s, or it's a little darker. They view the world a little bit different. And I think it's a real natural progression, like almost a real human story on how they evolve as people. Like you've seen, have you heard of the Up series, the Up documentary series?
No, I have not.
That's where they basically film the same people for every 7 years. They see where they are in their lives and see what's going on with them, what's happened to them.
I have seen part of that. I didn't know what it was called, though.
Yeah, it's basically they started when they were 7 years old, and every 7 years you get to see where they are in their life, what's changed with them, and stuff like that. And this is kind of a similar thing, except it's a fictional version. You get to see what's happened to them, where they're going. But it's really, again, it's all about the dialogue. You do love the characters. You want to see them happy. But it's all about their interaction, the way these two people belong together.
Okay, so then the last one we got, which just came out recently, was Before Midnight.
Yes, Before Midnight, which is now takes place again another 9 years later. They are now married, or not married. They're together, but they have 2 kids together, a set of twins, and they've been together, the last 9 years. And their relationship is again changed a little bit. Whereas the first 2 movies were more about the passion they have for each other. This one, now they've had this one more explores what it's like to be in a long-term committed relationship, and that no matter how much you love someone, the difficulties and the struggles that come along with that, and what it means to make mistakes and argue, and how simple things can get out of hand, but at the same time how much you can have these great moments with someone, and how much they mean to you, and how much you care. It's a little bit darker, I would say. When I first watched it, I had a harder time dealing with it. I thought it was definitely tonally a little different, but then when I watched it a second time, it felt right at home with the movies. It was a natural progression.
And is there going to be in another 9 years? Is there going to be another one?
To be quite honest, they said anything's possible. If they feel there's something there with the story, they're going to write it. I mean, the last 2 movies were co-written. The second and the third one were co-written by Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, and they put things from their life in it. So it's possible, if they feel they have something to do with the characters, they both want to, the chance of revisiting it again if they feel it's right. So obviously my pick of the week then for this is going to be the first one, because if you haven't seen it, then you need to check out the first one, Before Sunrise.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Thank you, Mr. Joshua, and we're going to be diving right into the nitty-gritty here in my swamp. Tell you about one of my favorite comic book characters, my first comic book character, and I don't think he gets a lot of love, and that is going to be the Green Hornet. Do you have any thoughts on the Green Hornet?
Maybe he doesn't get a lot of love because he hasn't been used properly in, 40 years?
Yeah, well,
50 years.
It's really sad that when you talk about the Green Hornet, most people think of the crappy Seth Rogen movie. They made him out to be a doofus, which is what he's not. It's kind of funny if you watch... they both had series in the 1960s, Batman and Green Hornet. Green Hornet took itself very, very seriously, where Batman was really campy. And then you fast forward 40 years, and you get the very, very cheesy, campy Green Hornet, where you get the serious Nolan Batman films. So he's a character similar to Batman, but he doesn't get the respect that he deserves. He's one of the original. He predates Superman. He predates Batman, Captain America. He predates all the superheroes that you think about, and was actually created in 1936.
Yeah, what was he originally? A radio program, wasn't he?
Yes, he's gone across all kinds of different medias, but he was originally created for the radio, and it was created by Fran Stryker and George Trendle, I believe. In 1936, off of the popularity of the Lone Ranger. They both had created the Lone Ranger as radio serials, and the initial character, he's actually a descendant of the Lone Ranger. That's something a lot of people don't know, but comic books have thrown it in there as kind of a little nod to him. He's a nephew or something like that, a grandnephew. But the story is about Britt Reed. It's gone through a lot of different incarnations, but the basic story is it's about Britt Reed, who is a famous publisher, rich guy who owns the Daily Sentinel, a newspaper it's been in Chicago, it's been in Sentinel City.
The location's not important.
Yeah, they've changed it up over the years. But he's a newspaper publisher who turns himself into a vigilante of sorts, similar to Batman, only he takes the bad side of it. He lets everybody, all the criminals, know that he's a criminal mastermind himself. even though he's not, and then has a secret relationship with the district attorney of the city to kind of get everybody put in jail and get the criminals taken away. But everybody in the city, the criminals and the cops alike, think he is just a criminal mastermind when he's actually not.
He always wants half.
Yep. And then he's also got a sidekick, and Batman has Robin. Everybody knows how terrible Robin is. Green Hornet has Kato.
And Kato, I would say, is actually probably as popular as the Green Hornet, simply because of who played him in the original TV show version.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in just a minute. But Kato is his chauffeur. And again, the story's gone through several incarnations, but he's Britt Reed saved his life when he was over in Southeast Asia, and Kato came over with him to kind of repay that debt and became his sidekick for all of this vigilantism that they're going on. So the series I actually own, and you can get them on iTunes, a bunch of the old radio serials. So if you're into that kind of nostalgic stuff, go on and check it out. A lot of it had to do with like the 1930s, bootleggers and criminals like that, people who mess with unions and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're radio of interest, so you have to be prepared for a different storytelling. This is something that most people aren't familiar with anymore, but I think I've only listened to one of them, and it was a lot of fun, and I'd like to listen to more because I like that kind of stuff, though. I think it's a different kind of storytelling than people used to sit around the radio and listen to them, and that's how Green Hornet got so big.
Yeah, and it really is a lost art, the radio, kind of radio shows that they used to have back before television, the radio dramas. So check those out on iTunes. They're pretty good. Just listen to one of them, see if you like it. And then kind of they did some movie serials in the 1940s as well.
Another lost art, the movie serials.
Yeah, they were basically TV shows for the movies. So what would happen is you'd go to the movie theater to watch either a movie, or a lot of times, especially during World War II, people would go and watch the newsreels. Before that, you would get a serial. All of your Three Stooges movies, your episodes that are called episodes, are actually movie serials. So people would go to the theater, watch these serials, and each week it would be a new storyline, or every couple of weeks it would be a new part of the story, and it had a long story, like a continuing story for a television show.
Yeah, it'd be like 5-10 minute episodes or something like that.
So after the movie serials, you go to kind of the 50s. There was a few movie serials. The radio show was still going, but then it kind of died out. And in the 1960s, they actually came out with a few comic books. Wasn't very popular. But then in the 1960s, with the popularity of the Batman show, in 1966 they came out with the Green Hornet show, which, like I said, is a lot more serious take on the story, and it was starring Van Williams and our Kato, who made Kato famous, Mr. Bruce Lee, in his very first role.
Yeah, and what I like about the show is you mentioned it's very serious, but it's funny how similar to the Batman show, because it was made by the same people in style it is, but it literally the only difference is the factor of how
the comedic
tone, the comedic tone of Batman is completely gone pretty much from this. There's a little bit of comedy, but very, very little.
Yeah, Adam West's Batman was a really just a dork, whereas you find Van Williams' Green Hornet was like a playboy. He was like, this rich guy, and those roles, like I said, have kind of reversed since then. And actually in Asia, it's so popular, it's actually called the Kato show over there. It wasn't called the Green Hornet show.
Yeah, and I thought the show was really good. I remember watching it as kids. I liked it as much as the Batman show. I felt they were very similar. As an adult, I can see how different they are, but I still like both of them. I think they're both fun in different ways, and I'm glad we actually have it in the house to watch, because it's
you can't buy it. It's not out, but we got a special one. There episodes like recorded from
Stars, I think.
It was TV Land, recorded from TV Land, and then there's a bunch of those movie serials in there as well. But the show didn't last very long. It only lasted a season and a half, and then it was kind of killed. And they did bring it back a couple times for some TV movies that all it was spliced together episodes. So it wasn't really anything special. But then here comes in when I finally got into the Green Hornet, which was in 1990. I was 9 years old, and we went to the mini mart on the base, and they had some comic books there, and they had the Green Hornet comic book. And I hadn't bought any comic books or anything before. My dad had told me I'd like the old Batman show, and he was telling me how he loved Green Hornet. He was more of a Green Hornet fan. So they had the issue there. It was issue number 9 of the Now Comics version, and it was 1990, and he picked it up for me. And from then on, I was like into comics, and I was especially into the Green Hornet.
Yeah, I remember that from when we were kids. I was getting into Marvel and stuff like that, and you were all about your Green Hornet.
Yeah, but I really, really enjoyed the kind of storyline that they do in the Now comics, where it actually takes place. It's a more natural progression. Like Bruce Wayne has been alive since the 1910s, and he's been Batman since 1930. While Green Hornet, they kind of did it a little bit differently, where there was the original Green Hornet, who was Britt Reed, and then his nephew became Britt Reed II, which was actually the one from the TV show. And then after that, the original Britt Reed's grandson, Alan, became it. He got killed on his first mission, and then this one takes up with Paul Reed, who's Alan Reed's brother. So they gave a natural progression storyline. I think that was really interesting. You don't see that in comics. You see the same guy playing the same character over and over again.
It's a very similar thing to like the Phantom comic. I don't know if you've seen the amazing movie with Billy Zane or read any of the comics, but it's kind of the same thing. He's an older character as well that has the same thing. He was a character that it was a family thing. When one would die, the son would take over. One would get too old, the son would take over, and so people felt it was this continuous character, even though it wasn't.
Yeah, and then eventually, that kind of ended his run. It was the first start of like a female Kato. Mishi was the name of the Kato in that, and I really kind of fell in love with that Kato. That was my Kato growing up. But the series ended from Now Comics because Now Comics went defunct, went out of business, and you wouldn't get any Green Hornet until late in 2007, 2008. Kevin Smith had actually written a script for the movie that he threw to the studios. They didn't like it, and basically turned it off and said, we don't want to make this movie. And they ended up going with Seth Rogen writing the movie, which was just terrible. I'm not going to go into that too much, but he actually sold his comic book property, his script, to Dynamite Entertainment, who put out his 10 issues of his storyline, and that was like a reinvention of the character. It's a really great storyline, and it launched a whole bunch of more titles. You got the original Green Hornet from the 1940s, 30s, and the origin story there. You got Kato issues, Kato Origins. You got a whole mess of them, Green Hornet in the future. It was really a good revitalization, but what often happens with Green Hornet is it gets taken over by terrible writers, and the story just goes from bad to worse, and it ends up dying again, and that's where we're kind of at right now.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of titles, that's on a title like your Supermans, your X-Men's, where even though when you have a string of bad writers come in, that it can survive and last longer than that. I don't think the title's strong enough in the cultural frame of mind. Like, people don't know it well enough for it to really hold. And when you're getting bad things like the movie as well, you can't keep the title fresh. You can't keep it in the public's mainframe. Whereas Batman, will keep going no matter what, because we've had how many good versions in the past it stands out in people's mind. Green Hornet, while it has good things, they only know the TV show and the movie for the most part. The comic would never really hit the ground.
Yeah, then the comic, none of the versions of the comic ever hit off the ground. The 1960s TV show, a lot of people didn't like it because it wasn't as cheesy and campy as the Batman show, and that's why it went off the air. People only really know it because Bruce Lee was in it. And then you get this bad movie that was in 2010 or something like that. So the character's really had a disservice done to him, and it's really a shame because I really love the character. I've collected a whole bunch of the issues. I've got the old TV show. I've got the old movie serials. I've got the radio serials. I'm really a big fan of the Green Hornet, and I'm kind of sad that he doesn't get the respect he deserves.
Yeah, he's a good character. It's just he's got to be used properly. Hopefully, in a few years, we'll see somebody else try and reinvent him and do something good with him. Hopefully,
I can only hope.
It's the final countdown.
Moving on to our final countdown this week. Tonight we're going to go with something that I think is an interesting topic. You obviously have to have a taste of music similar to ours to really enjoy this, but we're going to do our top 5 concert films. Just go through them and mention a couple of brief comments on why we thought they were great, and I'll start us off. Go ahead and start us off. My number 5 is something I actually just saw recently. I've never been an Elvis fan, but I watched his comeback to Vegas show that was recorded in 1970 called and was released theatrically. It was called Elvis, That's the Way It Is. And by the time the movie was over, I was a fan.
Did you become an Elvis fan?
I was an Elvis fan. I fell hard. I got to go to Graceland now.
Alrighty, so my number 5 is going to be Queen live at Wembley. When I saw this when I was a kid, the light show, just the great presence of the band and everything like that really sucked me into it, and it's still to this day I love watching that show.
My number 4, I've never seen that show, by the way. My number 4 is going to be Kiss Unplugged. This was recorded in '96. It was kind of the official reunion of the band, I suppose, where you saw the 2 original members come back for the first time.
Which led to the huge reunion tour, the makeup coming back on.
And it's probably the Kiss show I've watched the most.
All right, so my number 4 is going to be Black Label Society, Boozed, Bruised, and Broken Bone. I first found this. It came out when I was really heavily into my Zakk Wylde phase, and this is just the best show I've ever seen. It was right after my favorite album. He plays a lot of songs off of that, and the show is just off the hook.
Nicely coined. My number 3 is the Big Four, which was recorded in Bulgaria or something like that.
Sofia, Bulgaria.
Sofia, Bulgaria. It's Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax all in one show, and it's like 100,000 people. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great show. My number 3 is actually similar to that one. Just came out recently. Found it on Netflix. I love the band Metallica, and they came out with Through the Never. I didn't get to see the 3D version, but that show is just ridiculous. The special effects and the pyro and everything that they put into that show was just amazing.
Did the story work with it?
Not really. I could do without the story, but it was okay.
Yeah. My number 2 is going to be my favorite Alice concert, which is The Nightmare Returns. I mean, I can't really say anything besides this is where it's at.
Yeah. So my number 2 is going to be the Kissology series. There's actually 3 different DVDs for it, and it takes place from their career, from their first film concert in 1974, and goes all the way up to the reunion shows and stuff like that. Really encompasses their career. There's like 20 different performances in there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. My number 1, which I think is hands down the best concert film I've ever seen. I've never was even a fan of the band before I saw it. It's called The Last Waltz. It's actually directed by Martin Scorsese, and it's also kind of a documentary at the same time. It's about the last live performance of the band, with a bunch of guest stars from Ringo Starr to Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Neil Diamond. It's amazing.
Okay, so my number 1, you've already said it, is Alice Cooper, The Nightmare Returns. This is what started it all. This is what led me from a nice little boy on this trajectory to this long-haired metalhead that I am now. Alice Cooper, Halloween Night, 1986, tearing it up. The blood, the guts, the gore, the songs, the music is the best he's ever played, the best it's ever sounded. I cannot shower enough love on this. This is what started it all for me.
Yeah, the only reason it wasn't my number 1 is because of while it was an amazing concert, I thought The Last Waltz was not only an amazing concert, but an amazing movie as well, with the documentary aspect of it and just the real summing up of their career. So there's our final countdown this week.
And join us next week where we discuss Peter Capaldi's first journey through as the 12th Doctor. Mr. Joshua goes into 9 reasons why he loves one of his favorite actresses, and I give you a tour through Whitechapel, London. See you then.
Go away or I shall taunt you a second time.